Good afternoon, I am Tammy Eggeling and I am representing the Elephant Reintegration Trust and addressing the topic of the effect of wildlife guides on elephant behaviour and whether we are operating in a sphere that is actually too close for comfort. I realise this is a topic that doesn't require too much introduction, but the relevance of it is no less important. As in our current environment, tourism continues to increase, elephant density continues to increase, especially in the South African context of fence systems. And so we unfortunately have increasing frequency of human-elephant interactions and incidences. And as you may be aware of from the media and even just the last few months, these are occurring in all contexts, on foot, in vehicles, involving guides, as well as general public, and on both small fenced reserves and national parks. Each incident somehow always leaves us speculating about who's to blame, the individual or the elephant, and why it happened. I know acknowledgements usually do go last, but the direction of this particular study is largely in thanks to my not-so-faithful steed, but we'll get back to her and where she fits in. Naturally, a complex relationship exists between wildlife tourism, conservation, and elephant well-being in South Africa. One of these conflict areas lies in how wildlife sightings are conducted and balancing guest satisfaction and what they want or think they want, while minimizing disruption to the elephants that are being sought after and viewed. And it's when there are imbalances or misaligned priorities and focuses that you are likely to have problems, conflicts, or incidences. Proximity must be a very important consideration, considering incidences are only possible due to closeness and circumstance. You only have a problem if you upset an elephant and you are close enough that you are unable to escape the upset elephant. So the relevance of proximity can be represented in the form of awareness zones, which span from your comfort zones where it involves being far enough away that the behavior of a subject or another individual is not affected by your presence, all the way through to your alert and warning zones where an animal may express discomfort or agitation, and then at your critical zone, where an animal finds themselves in a position where they feel they need to respond to you, either by fleeing or fighting. In the wake of this, one would expect, at the very least, that there would be industry guidelines enforced to help mitigate problems caused by vehicle and tourist proximity. And while there are recommended approach distances, there seems to be a lack of consensus, with several different approach distances being recommended by tour operators, reserves, and academic institutions, ranging from close to very far and conservative recommendations. So what if guidelines are not followed and elephants are approached too closely? This repeated negative stimuli can result in dangerous behavior being exhibited by the elephant. This creates a risk for humans. And then you sometimes have this development of elephants being labeled as problem animals, and they can be euthanized to prevent from further incidences, and this can disrupt existing social structures and also doesn't solve the problem, as it can continue to happen if the behavior doesn't change. So being able to pinpoint what circumstances are leading to incidences is an important area of research for the tourism industry, as not only the well-being of the elephant is being compromised, but also the safety of tourists and wildlife guides, of course. So through our question of wanting to understand the role of game viewing protocols on elephant disturbance, we essentially wanted to find out, does guide identity and approach types affect elephant behavior differently? And are elephant awareness zones perhaps better indicators of how to approach the elephants rather than using an arbitrary approach distance set by management staff? So in terms of experimental design, this was a unique scenario, as in our normal behavioral monitoring protocols, we do everything we can to minimize our disturbance level and impact on the elephant behavior that we are trying to document. So for us, it's always been the further, the better. So manipulating approach distance is not something we would have set out to do, but we were aided by some unique circumstances into an uncooperative field vehicle that left us stranded during a field session. To make the most of the circumstances, we wanted to continue our elephant monitoring sessions and ended up opportunistically joining the daily game drives on the reserve in order to get this right. And we very quickly realized that each guide conducted their drives differently, and this in turn elicited very different responses from the elephants and different things that we'd been seeing. So suddenly we found ourselves with a front row seat to multiple approach types and approach distances that we had no control over. This indirectly provided the perfect opportunity to observe and in turn quantify the effects on elephants of these tourist drives conducted by known guides. Not only could we see a number of approach distances being practiced, it became clear that whoever was driving approached uniquely. Some approached slowly, some sped into a sighting, some repositioned multiple times, some intercepted elephant paths, and so suddenly it became clear why when you spoke to different guides, they actually shared very different views of the elephant temperaments. So after we realized the learning opportunity this afforded us, we continued to conduct sessions from the reserve game viewers and ended up with 3 separate data collection sessions, which amounted to 80 observation days split into morning and afternoon sessions, and this was between 2022 and 2024. During each sighting, all visible elephants were filmed from the time of arrival and while within a 100-meter radius of the vehicle. Every time the game viewer was repositioned, a new rangefinder reading was taken to the closest elephant and a new video recording was started to ensure that we captured the behaviors at each new approach distance. So all fine scale behaviors were captured during these sessions, guided by an established ethogram, with particular focus on the more indicative behaviors that would be placed in the relevant categories of interest, which were ambivalence, avoidance, conflict and confrontation, interactive behaviors, vigilant behaviors, and aggression towards vehicle. We then tallied the total frequencies of the detailed behaviors within each behavioral category and converted this into an absolute frequency per minute for each video. A cutoff time of 10 minutes was also chosen for each elephant, starting from when the game viewer was repositioned and while any individuals were in sight. To put the behaviors in context, we utilized the evaluation tool created by Save the Elephants that acts as a guideline when viewing elephants, as it divides the detailed behaviors into what would be triggered in each of these awareness zones. So we were using the nature of the observed behaviors to see what awareness zones were being encroached on, not just absolute distances. And in this way, we used an absence-presence approach of observed behaviors to illustrate in which zone the elephants were. We analyzed the data using R, and that's also a very royal we, and used GLMs to determine whether wildlife guides and approach distances influence the elephant's behavior. Same approach was followed when we wanted to determine whether the approach distances of the guides affected the detailed behavioral frequencies shown by the elephants within each category. And then we use a chi-square test to determine whether behavioral responses differed based on the wildlife guide driving the vehicle and due to the individual approach strategies. So first we wanted to see, after processing about 458 video recordings with almost 3,500 observation minutes of all the elephants combined, we used this to look at the relationship between wildlife guide and approach distance, and we did actually find this relationship to be significant. We found that guides 2, 3, and 5 more often than not approached the elephants at 0 to 20 meters, and in turn were responsible for triggering higher frequencies of certain behavioral categories, which I will go into a bit more in a moment. As a start, this was slightly concerning, considering this is not only against the reserve's guiding regulations, but these findings point to certain guides choosing to be bolder, in spite of the fact it causes negative responses in the elephants. The disregard for regulations may point to an overriding desire to impress tourists to view the elephants at closer distances, a lack of understanding of the consequences associated with close approach distances, or just a lack of training or accountability. So when all the behaviors were combined without categorizing them, and when looking at the effect of approach distance, we found the behavioral responses of the elephants reduced significantly in all the distance categories further than 20 meters away. Interestingly, but unsurprisingly, driver and guide identity had a significant effect on the behavior shown by the elephants, where the highest frequencies were associated with guide 7 specifically, and in addition, significantly higher frequencies of all behaviors were shown in response to most of the guides when compared to an intercept. When we compared the detailed behavioral frequencies within each behavioral category, we noted significantly lower frequencies of ambivalent behavior at distances further than 20 meters. And in this category, the elephants also showed significantly higher frequencies of ambivalent behavior in response to guides 2, 3, 4, and 7. The elephants showed significantly lower frequencies of conflict and confrontation at 40 to 60 meters in comparison to the closer approach distances. And so increased distances removed the risk of an elephant seeking confrontation with the vehicle. We again noticed that in the presence of Wildlife Guide 7, the elephant showed significantly higher frequencies of this behavior. Aggression towards the vehicle was only observed a handful of times and was highest at 0 to 20 meters and did not occur when the vehicle was over 60 meters away. And this indicates that potentially dangerous encounters would be outright avoided if a minimum distance of 60 meters is maintained between the vehicle and elephants. At the baseline 0 to 20 meter approach distance, the elephant showed significantly higher frequencies of interactive behavior than at the further approach distances. And these interactions may be perceived as, innocent encounters providing unique experiences for tourists. But there is an ethical dilemma where, as we've said, multiple repetitions could result in aggressive outbursts towards vehicles, and then you have elephants being overwhelmed by multiple human interferences during a sighting. And then even though this was not statistically analyzed, trends indicate that higher percentages of elephants were in their comfort zone when at further distances away, and the opposite trend was true for the alert zone, where elephants showed higher percentages at closer distances. Warning zone being triggered had the lowest percentage at 60 to 80 meters, and the critical zone was triggered within all the distances except in the furthest distance category. And then looking to the impact of guides on elephant behavior, we observed higher percentages of elephants in their comfort zone in the presence of guides 1, 4, 5, and 6, whereas the elephants were triggered more in their alert zone in the presence of guides 2 and 3. Wildlife Guide 7 triggered the highest percentage of elephants in the warning zone, and then only 4 guides triggered a critical zone response from the elephants, with Guide 2 having the highest percentage of these behaviors. The study again highlighted how using detailed behaviors can be a very effective tool in answering questions around what affects elephants and to what extent. And we think this has a myriad of applications. So in this case, it enabled us to establish that elephants can recognize and respond uniquely to individual vehicles, driving styles, and proximity, whereby further approach distances cause less disturbance and cause for conflict. We also conclude that assessing in which awareness zones the elephants are in could be a better guideline for establishing a threshold for approaching elephants in particular situations, rather than just approaching to a predetermined distance as a rule of thumb. And then these findings also emphasize the importance of balancing the economic benefits of wildlife tourism with ethical practices and tourist experience to ensure the well-being of all the counterparts in the system. Then a huge thank you to the support that enabled this research to be done, as well as presented here today. And if you'd like to learn more about our elephant research, please do visit ERT's website. And if you scan the QR code, you can check out an elephant viewing guide we have developed to roll out in provincial and national parks where possible, to at least help the broader public to better understand how to safely view elephants, as not everyone should know better, like guides, and may be unfamiliar with recommended approach protocols or being sensitive to elephant body language. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamara. We have time for one quick question, and Yashan, you had your hand first.
Thank you, Tammy, for a really cool talk. It's such an interesting topic, and I'm glad you talked about it. But as someone who comes into contact with elephants a lot, I can't help but feel that it's also a two-way street. Elephants are not, a homogeneous, single personality thing. They've got their own personalities, and they've got their own experiences. They've got their own bad moods. Mm-hmm. And especially for people who've ever been to the Kruger Park, sometimes you can be doing all the things properly and you get charged anyway by the matriarch, and you have to reverse 2 kilometers or around the corner just so that you... And it's actually not the fault of the driver or the guide. And at that situation, you think, oh, maybe that elephant's come back from Mozambique or something like that, and it's been shot at recently or something like this. So how much of that, can we take into account? A place like Gonorrhea, for example, where you get charged by elephants all the time for no good reason.
Maybe just stay away from elephants. I would say the biggest applications of something like this is where it's avoidable and you don't have elephants behaving unpredictably that don't have histories like these interacts. These kinds of escalations of sightings shouldn't be happening if that respect is created. Obviously, if you have these unpredictable elements, but again, understanding what can escalate or at least help a situation, be that turning off a vehicle, be that initially not approaching within a distance, first seeing certain behavioral, being sensitive to those behaviors could turn you around and you move away rather than approaching further and seeing how a sighting goes. But I think a lot could be prevented just with this start, but it's not to say you are going to have your unpredictable individuals, of course.
Thank you so much, Tamara.